If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. This is the world that you know. The world as it was at the end of the 20th century. It exists now only as part of a neural interactive simulation that we call the Matrix.
Neo, I am only trying to free your mind, but I can only open the door. You have to walk through it.
Got ya. You thought I was Morpheus, didn't you? It's just Bongiorno being a moron here on a Wednesday afternoon for another edition of How to Stay Sane During the COVID-19 Crisis. Okay, so we're finally back after a little bit of an intermission due to technological situations, getting things up on the lectures, getting just back into the swing of like putting these lectures together, which I was doing, fairly with factory-like precision last semester, and had to just kind of get back up on the ball, and I had a few life things kind of get in the way. The Matrix was kind of having its way with me, and I needed to combat it. But now we're back, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for that little Morpheus interlude at the top. I actually repurposed it from a video from last semester, so it's like if I look a little different, it's months have passed, but I thought it was cute anyway. So, we're going to start talking about the Matrix today. We're going to hit a couple of bullet points. Hopefully at this point you've all watched it or rewatched it, because for the next couple lectures we're going to speak about it. And we're going to speak about it in a way in which we will be using it as a kind of frame of reference for everything else we are going to talk about this semester, and we'll get to that. It's like, I'll explain more of like, why do I use the Matrix to kind of explain our predicament with video and image making technology, and that more will be revealed, my friends. The Swami Bongiorno has his hand on the cosmic rudder, and all will be well, and all will be revealed. You might not like all of it, but, hence the red pill. The red pill, like Morpheus says, it's like, all I'm going to do is make a half-hearted attempt at giving the truth. I'm telling the truth. Like my mommy, it's like, I'm refining all these things that my mother used to tell me as being like, kind of useful in like teaching, like tell the truth. Yeah, so we're gonna do that. We're gonna get into some other things, and this should be up by tomorrow night. I'm doing this on Monday. It should be up by Tuesday night. I should have another lecture put together in short order right after that. This whole unpacking of the Matrix usually takes 2 lectures, so expect the next lecture to kind of round off, because there's a lot going on in this film. There's a lot to unpack, and it can be read on a lot of different levels, and we want to talk about those different levels, and I'm gonna like show clips from the movie, and I had to figure out how to incorporate that into it, because usually in a brick and mortar setting, what I usually do is just go down to the console and bring up the movie, and show scenes. Now I need to incorporate them into the video, into the Premiere timeline, so that we all get on the same page. So The Matrix, made in 1999. Why are we watching it? Is it still topical? Is it still prescient? My main thesis about The Matrix, and I think that most of you that have watched it understand the ways in which it acts as what is called in egghead terminology a allegory. What is an allegory? Well, the definition that I pulled up many, many moons ago is basically just this: an allegory. A story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. Not always a moral or political one, but more often than not, an allegory acts in that kind of way. Or, for instance, allegories have persisted and existed throughout history. I think one of the primary allegories that the Wachowski brothers, or now they're transgender sisters now, and I want to talk about that too. That I honestly believe that there's a very, very strong feminist and feminist oriented theme and message that runs through the film that we should talk about. But I think that its main source, it's like since from time immemorial, there have been allegories about our status in reality. How reality is constituted, what we can know, what we can't know. And one of the great granddaddies of all this would have been, the old Athenian scholar from 2,400 years now, Plato. Not Plato like the Plato that you make in second grade with the machine, but Plato, the Greek philosopher, who wrote a lot and still has a lot, I believe, to say to 2020 people. He wrote a book called the Republic that in a lot of philosophy and literature classes still gets read. And there's a chapter in the Republic called The Allegory of the Cave. The Allegory of the Cave. And it goes something like this. Some of you probably have know about this Allegory of the Cave already, but it's a very, very famous allegory in Western humanities and the Western civilization tradition about, and he's posing a question. It's essentially a kind of it's a thought experiment for all intents and purposes. And within that allegory, he poses this scenario. He says, say you were born in a cave and shackled to a chair. Let's not like pick it apart. How does a baby like stay in the same? Well, whatever. Let's not pick it apart. But essentially, you're born in this cave, and the picture will show, and I'll zoom into it, that you are basically faced a certain way, and you can't turn your head, You got to look straight forward. And let's say that within this cave, as a prisoner in the cave, there was a fire behind you, and there was, say, a roadway or a platform where people were holding up silhouettes or cutouts of different objects. Everyone does, it's like back in like 3rd grade. We do shadow puppets, shadow plays, and that the images that they were holding up between the fire and you were being projected as shadows cast on the wall, And what's Plato attempting to say in this allegory? He's saying that given that being put in that situation, what would reality be for you? How would reality be constituted for you? Or what would I know being in this situation as being reality? And what Plato will say is that all reality would be is these shadows cast on the wall. This is all you would know. This would be your reality because there's nothing else. It's kind of like what we were talking about with McLuhan's whole idea, his thought experiment of the fish in water. If you don't know anything else, if you're not given access to any other information, then this would be your reality, and Plato is attempting to say something about the nature of man, the nature of mankind, kind of being caught in a cave and just kind of knowing, what is ever being presented to them as reality, as such. And within that allegory, as the narrative, as the storyline proceeds, somebody breaks free and somehow gets to the surface. And since all they've ever known is these shadows on a cave, when they see the sun and the plants and everything, it's like they don't have any. It blows their mind. It blows their mind because they don't have any of the perceptual or cognitive tools to understand what they were living in and what they essentially woke up from. All right? And this is what the Matrix is about, ultimately. Waking up from some limited concept of reality into a wider knowledge of what's really going on, And it's very much like the allegory in The Wizard of Oz, too. I think it links with that. This is kind of a no-brainer. The whole idea, and I'm sure everybody sitting here watching this has at some time or another watched The Wizard of Oz. If you haven't, you've probably been living in some cave of your own. The Great Wizard of Oz. We sat through it every year, and when the previews would come on, Bongiorno would just leap for joy to watch The Wizard of Oz again. It's that kind of movie. It was the Harry Potter of its day. I would say that it's better, but that's just me. And the whole idea of The Wizard of Oz, we know the story of The Wizard of Oz, the series of smoke and mirrors that is projected by this guy from Kansas, this kind of workaday nebbishy dude from Kansas working behind the mechanism, and it takes Dorothy's dog Toto to go and nip and tug at the curtain and pull it aside, and voila, it's like, and while this is going on, the wizard is like, the guy is like, don't look at the man behind the curtain. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. And I would contend essentially that the Matrix falls within the same narrative paradigm, of being able to see the man behind the curtain, and with that knowledge comes a certain amount of empowerment. It's not, but unlike, the reveal in The Wizard of Oz, the reveal in The Matrix is a little bit more nefarious, a little bit more ominous, a little bit more, creepy. And it certainly, and I can remember watching it for the first time, around 99, 2000. I didn't see it at this theater. I saw it shortly after that. And being like, whoa! It's like one of these movies that just makes you go like, whoa! And it was one of the first of its kind, And, we can't take away from it. It's like, so The Matrix comes out. The Matrix is already, what, like 20 years old, 21 years old, and yet, it's like, I think that a lot of it still holds up and speaks to, a lot of different situations that we find ourselves in, because essentially one can say that in many ways the Matrix is more prescient than ever. I mean, are we not kind of been forced by a structure of power to kind of retreat to our own respective caves and kind of have our reality limited by situations outside of our control? It's all about, and one of the other things about the Matrix is that ultimately we'll find that it's about control. It's really about control, and specifically, not necessarily about control of the body, although that's there, but the control of what goes on up here, my friends, up here in this nebulous area of gray matter or neurons or whatever your concept of mind is, whether you're a neurophysiologist, whether you're, whatever that is, all right? So there's a surface reading, and I tell this to my documentary students, that when you watch a film of any kind, if it's a film of any kind of merit whatsoever, and not just some, if it's not Beverly Hills Chihuahua or Turner and Hooch, if it's something that is not moronic, it usually exists on a couple different levels, right? There's this apparent meaning of a film, and then there is the deeper meaning of the film, and we'll get into what the deeper meaning of the Matrix is. What is the deeper meaning of the Matrix? It was very, very. It's like, so on the surface, the film is a dystopian sci-fi thriller, replete with mind-blowing special effects and chock full of action sequences. So it was wildly successful at the time. And I think a lot of people just went and saw it as this kind of sci-fi action thriller. And what ultimately happened was that, not unlike other films, it's like people started to see it and reevaluate it. Like the intelligentsia, the egghead started to pick it apart and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't just another version of, whatever, of whatever the thing is, what's the Transformers or whatever, but there's a lot of depth to this thing, and it's trying to say something about the human condition in a very kind of philosophical and esoteric kind of way, so people started picking it apart. But we can't take away from the fact that, it was a mainstream film with a lot of popularity, and it turned into a franchise because it would spawn 2 sequels, and made a whole bunch of money. At the time that I put out these notes, it had grossed over $460 million worldwide, and that's a lot of coin. It's a lot of coin. However, withstanding its status as this kind of sci-fi action thing, it's an allegory. The film can be read allegorically, and it can be read on several different levels. Will be my contention in these lectures. One of the primary allegories of this is basically it's attempting to allude to the fact that in many ways our planet and our society has been turned into a prison planet. That there's a kind of feeling of not being free, that has been promulgated by a mechanism that is not always looking out for our best interests. There's that reading, but I mean, there's another primary reading of this, that people that are into like spirituality and self-actualization, and that runs the gamut between, you know, kind of weird new age people and like serious practitioners of meditation or whatever. They read it with these kind of new age connotations as a kind of, in some ways, and certainly The Matrix is not alone within this pantheon of films. It's a spiritual journey. It's a spiritual journey of this, and this is one reading. All right, this is one way of looking at it. It's a spiritual journey of this character Neo that we'll talk about, and what he'll find out and how he'll deal with it. You know. So there's this kind of spiritual journey or quest aspect of it. There are Gnostic and Buddhist symbols throughout the film. Gnosticism, short term for that, you might want to wiki it. Gnosticism is just a form of mystical Christianity. All right, the symbolic mystical elements of Christianity that have always kind of been there within Christianity for those who wanted to look. And of course, there's Buddhist symbols and other kind of what I would hazard to call symbols of a transcendental nature or of an occult nature. The great mythologist Joseph Campbell, who loved to take, and it's a myth too. It's kind of a modern myth, and it also goes and gets its source material, and we're going to talk about this. It goes and gets its source material from a lot of other different mythological traditions. So on one level, Neo, also known as Thomas Anderson, and we'll get into everything in this film. It's loaded with the names. All have different meanings within a certain economy, of a symbolic kind of economy, you know. But Joseph Campbell would consider it probably an entry into this whole idea of the hero's journey, you know. Joseph Campbell was a famous scholar that passed away, I believe, a decade ago, and was always looking at myths and how myths and mythology continue to inform our lives and acted as these templates for how we live our lives, how we see ourselves, you know, and this keeps going on, and we know it because certainly we can talk about everything from, when we talk about it in the other class, we talked about it the other day. It's like Wonder Woman, you know. Lo and behold, you know, all the it's like, for those of you who saw Wonder Woman, all the mythological and Greek mythology references in that, you know. Think of other things. Think of the entire Marvel franchise, you know, of Marvel films. They're essentially these kind of repackagings of different mythologies, you know, even as going as literally minded as having the Norse god Thor as one of its major characters. So mythology continues to, you know, inform our lives in fundamental ways, you know, and Campbell, I believe, would assert that The Matrix draws from that tradition too. You know, there's a lot, and we'll talk more about that. But this idea of the Keanu Reeves character, Neo, being a kind of spiritual, going through a kind of spiritual ritual or initiation with a mentor, you know, this whole relationship of the mentor and the student, you know, the mentor being Morpheus, and played by Lawrence Fishburne. And we see that pattern time and time again throughout the movies. Think of Star Wars. Think of like Empire Strikes Back and Yoda and Luke Skywalker's relationship to Yoda as the teacher. I think that, you know, the Skywalker Yoda dyad kind of maps to the Neo-Morpheus pairing, you know. But there's another reading here, not just a mythological or a spiritual or a reading or a transcendental reading, although that's all there, you know. Because ultimately, I'll make a assertion that the film is about the film and the film series itself is alluding to the idea that how does one free oneself? It's like once you get knowledge of this thing, how do you get out? How do you get out of it? You know, and I think that the movies kind of speak to that in a symbolic way. But there's another reading here. So there's that. Various readings. This is Joseph Campbell, Skywalker. There's another reading that comes out. And that other primary reading is one basically without all the spiritual connotations of it. And it has to do with man being trapped or caught in a web. And in what Karl Marx, God forgive me for mentioning Karl Marx, but guess what, folks? Going to be talking about Karl Marx a lot in here. He is not the Antichrist, I assure you. He was just a German economist that came up with stuff, all right? But Karl Marx would call... So the other primary reading is one of the modern individual caught in what Karl Marx would call a state of false consciousnness. What does that mean? We'll talk about it. But you can pretty much pick it apart. You know, you can pretty much pick apart what would false consciousness mean. A kind of consciousness that did not have access to a large priority of the truth, right? That we're kind of, you know, and that the truth is being withheld, you know, from us in various ways. That we are in such a state of social engineering and consumer propaganda. Think about the fish and water, folks. Think about the way that we're being bombarded 24/7 with images generated, you know, in shows and blogs and videos, YouTube, games. This entire environment that we exist in that has nothing to do, has only a partial connection with what one would consider the real world. You know, the real world of stuff. You know, and even going further than that, the real world of nature. You know, that we are in many ways in this kind of envelope that is divorced from nature in certain ways. You know? So we're going to stay, so we're going to be talking a lot more about this. That we are in such a state of misinformation that we can no longer either know the real, and I say the real in quotation marks, that we can't really know what's real anymore, if that even means anything, or have access to it. And the other picture I have up here is of a guy by the name of this French egghead dude, who was very famous, who passed away recently, by the name of Jean Baudrillard. Jean Baudrillard was a famous French philosopher who talked about this idea of the simulacra. What was the simulacra? We'll talk about that. But the simulacra is basically an egghead term for artifice. Things that are fabricated, right? Things that are simulated. You know, simulated reality. You know, think about games, how they simulate reality. You know, how you go through, for instance, whatever it is, whether it be like a fire drill or nowadays, you know, in our unfortunate contemporary scenario, like an active shooter drill where it's not real. You know, you're acting something else. So this idea of the simulacra. And the Wachowskis will actually make reference to this guy. All right, make reference to Baudrillard, and they'll do it in kind of an interesting way. They make several references to him, but Baudrillard and Morpheus will literally quote Jean Baudrillard at one point. We'll look at that scene when he says, "Welcome to the desert of the real." That's a expression that was used by Jean Baudrillard in an essay he wrote called "Simulacra and Simulation," which basically, whose basic contention is that the real is no longer something that we have access to, and that it's a desert. It's something that occurs out there, but it's kind of been emptied out because we're not really there anymore. So this idea of the desert of the real, going back to Marx was talking about, in Marx's writing, you'll find that he would talk about the state of hypnosis, like that we were all kind of like sleepwalkers who had become so indoctrinated by consumer culture that we were literally asleep. And he was talking about this as late as the mid-19th, as early rather as the mid-19th century, at a time when mass media technology, when Marx dies, all there really is, I don't even think there's movies yet. I think there is radio. There's definitely print and magazines and books, but he'll like draw attention to the way that we're being hypnotized before VR, before Web 2.0, before Instagram. So it begs the question, man. It's like if Marx kind of figured that we were being bamboozled, by technology, it's like in his day, what does it say about us? What does it say about us? So one can make the case that these various readings are interrelated. It's like it becomes a question of how you take this film up and what meanings that you can derive from it for you, from your own history and your own cultural awareness, like what ultimately it will mean for you. But that these various readings are interrelated and they map to each other. The common element, though, there is a common element in almost every single reading of this film. And believe me, there was a cottage industry created. There's books of essays out there that I would just, it's like a lot of it is just bullshit. But there's some good stuff out there. In fact, I'm probably going to put up a PDF of an essay on the Matrix that kind of takes it apart a little bit. But all these various readings and, eggheads, talking at these wine and cheese academic gatherings about this and that and the other thing when they try to be important. It's really about, it's like, those kind of people. But there's one common element in all these readings, and it's this. That we are essentially asleep, and that a power or powers is instrumental. There are powers that are instrumental in keeping us in that state. There is a vested interest by certain powers of keeping us in a state of docility, of not being awake, and essentially just not being free. Not being free. And I would even contend that wants to kind of keep us in a state where we're just kind of not good. Kind of miserable. And that there's a way of breaking through. There's some essential nature. We have some essential nature that is crying to be let loose. But this thing is just keeping you down. Hence, Bongiorno comes to the rescue, to unpack all this stuff and set you free. I will set you free, my brothers and sisters. I will set you free by this class for the mere price of tuition and just showing up. You will know a freedom that you've never known, a bliss and a joy that you will never know. But first, the red pill that doesn't taste good. It's like most medicines. Like when your mother made you take that thing, you hated it. All right. But a power that not only does not have our best interests at heart, but is using our narcosis. Our narcosis. This is a term that McLuhan, when I talk with Eric McLuhan, Marshall, the great, remember Marshall McLuhan, go Google him. When I talked to Eric McLuhan, Marshall McLuhan's son, he had this idea of narcosis. Narcosis coming from what? The Greek term for narcotics, folks. Narcotics. What do narcotics do? They keep us asleep. They keep us in a pleasant state. Ultimately, and we're seeing this more and more, and harrowing, heartbreaking, and horrifying ways. We're seeing this literally played out in 2020 with the opioid crisis, which for all intents and purposes, what is it? Why are so many people dying? In this state, chasing this thing, through the gates of death, because it's an escape. It feels good, and while you're in it, you really don't know what's going on with yourself, when your body starts to deteriorate and all that. And I think that that's another cogent metaphor here, of this kind of self-tranquilization that we're doing, and we're seeing it more and more, folks. I don't need to tell you, how the rates of substance abuse, alcoholism, you can see even like on the TV now. Now I'm seeing like ads. I don't know about y'all, but now I'm even seeing ads for COVID addiction. Not addiction to COVID as much as addiction and alcoholism that has been brought about from the pandemic due to people's fears and insecurities and losing touch with themselves, losing touch, this alienation and this isolation and this fear of the future, and not knowing that is translating into a lot of substance abuse. This is a no-brainer, but this isn't just another metaphor of the ways in which and we're going to talk about how we're kind of complicit. It's not just about some inner chamber of decision makers putting all this stuff out there, but how in many ways, and this is what the Matrix also wants to talk about, that there is this common element in this reading, that there is an element of culpability on the part of ourselves, that we are not to totally be exonerated in the game, because we give into it sometimes. We buy into it. And the ways in which we buy into it, and our complicity in this. And we'll see in the character Neo, this resistance, when Morpheus starts to show him what's really going on, he'll be like, get the F out of here. It's like I want to go back to sleep. And there'll even be a character. Remember, we'll talk about the character Cypher, played by Joe Pantoliano, who is of that type. He's like, why did I not take the other pill? All right, we have the red pill and the blue pill metaphor here, right? Remember that the red pill, and we'll see this scene. We'll see it in a minute. I'll show you this scene in a minute, where Morpheus first introduces himself to Neo through Trinity. So there's this element of complicity, that we are either partly or wholly responsible, and that we need to mobilize our own inner forces, right? Either as an individual or collectively as individuals, to resist and overcome the Matrix, whatever shape or form that Matrix takes. All right? So, in the Matrix, our technology has gotten the upper hand. This neurologically stimulated virtual world of the Matrix is all pervasive. So let's move on here. Okay, so I had this one slide just talking about science fiction. You know, it's like, obviously the Matrix is science fiction. And for those of you who are sci-fi aficionados and fans, or if you hate sci-fi, I don't care really. My mother used to hate sci-fi. She hated it, you know, and I loved it, which was always this point of contention with the two of us because, you know, at 6 o'clock, it's like every night at my house, like Star Trek, the original Star Trek would come on, and it was always at the time that my mother was making dinner, you know, but the television was in the other room, so I would get in this war with her about Star Trek. It was like the Star Trek war that went on in my house, you know, about like, if you don't come in, it's like, I was willing to just basically get grounded for watching Star Trek, you know. Not everybody's like that. My mother was very anti-Star Trek, you know. But science fiction. What does science fiction always do? Why does it, as a genre, I would contend that the best science fiction are just good sci-fi. You know, whether it be whatever's out there right now. It's like, I just watched Brave New World, didn't think that much about it, but whatever it is. Black Mirror or War of the Worlds or whatever sci-fi thing. Usually, if it's good sci-fi, it always takes place in some other place or time, in a galaxy far, far away, in the far future, blah, in an alternate dimension. But I would contend, Bongiorno would contend, and I'm sure you would agree with me, that the best science fiction is really about the here and now. It's always kind of vibing on what's going on now, in some way or another. Either it's, as far as dystopian sci-fi, it's usually a kind of warning, like, you know, if you guys keep on doing this, if you guys keep on building this stuff, or you do this, you keep on tampering with this is what's going to happen. You know, 80 to 90% of all sci-fi is about this kind of warning about tampering with certain things or going too far with certain things, and how it's like forces behind. It's like, and there's always like a payback, right? You think about like some of the earliest movies, like monster movies, like Frankenstein. What is Frankenstein? You know, Frankenstein, basically the message of Frankenstein is that there's some things that men should not try to mess around with, or it'll come back and just kind of bite you in the behind, right? Godzilla, you know, other things like that. You know, AI, anything that has to do with AI now is always some kind of cautionary tale. You know, and this is another, like, theme that goes on in the Matrix. You know, this idea of, like, of robotics and artificial intelligence being, for this particular mythos, AI is the thing that kind of got us, all right? So there's that. Good science fiction is always about the here and now, right? Let's get into the film. Very first scene, we have this character, Neo. Thomas Anderson is his street name. And what is he? What kind of character is he? He's a hacker, which is an interesting device that the Wachowskis use to get us into this, because making Neo a hacker kind of lends itself to the rest of the film. He hacks into things, you know. And this is his, Neo is his what? It's like it's his Twitch name. You know, it's his hacker name. It's whatever name, you know, you kind of put up there when you're playing Minecraft or whatever you call yourself, or, you know, it's like, but remember, there are two different meanings to this, right? Neo also in Latin means what? It means new. So we have this sense of a kind of new man. Something new is happening. But remember what it says, what Neo is in reverse. The one, right? And there is this whole theme in this, which I would say is, it has these Messiah connotations, these messianic, what is called messianic connotations of a Messiah figure that comes about, and that's a common theme in tons of science fiction and other stuff. I know they're doing like another remake of Frank Herbert's film book for the umpteenth time, and I wish they would stop. Dune. Dune is all about a Messiah figure, you know. Other things you could like give me examples in the blog when you watch this. Give me examples of other films that have this kind of Messiah figure in them. It's a common motif, but you know, where do we find Neo in the beginning of the film? Fast asleep. Like, little boy blue, come blow your horn. He is fast asleep, right? And the first thing that happens is he wakes up, right? And what does he see on his computer? Wake up, Neo. He doesn't know where it came from. It's one of those old school, like, plasma, like, green screens. There's a lot of green in this film. You got to pay attention to the use of colors and color schemes in this film. How everything that purports to be in the Matrix has kind of got this kind of green tint to it. And when Neo finally breaks free in this and rises to the occasion and becomes who he's supposed to become, what happens? The world parts and he sees everything as code. He sees the Matrix for what it is, and through that knowledge, he gains these powers. He gains these powers. So, you know, and I would say, and we're only going to do the first film. We're not going to do the trilogy. I have mixed feelings about the other two films. Other people have schooled me on this and said, "Buongiorno, you know, it's like you're writing off the other two films, and they're actually very important." But here we just concentrate on the first film, although I will touch upon the other two films because I think the trilogy is worth seeing. You know, I mean, it's not as much like The Lord of the Rings where you gotta see all three to get it, because with The Matrix, you know, it kind of stands alone in its meaning, because I'm sure that if The Matrix had just been this like flop, they wouldn't have made the other two. Whereas like The Lord of the Rings, it was already a thing, you know. So in each of the three films, however, Neo is asleep at the beginning of each film. So we're introduced to this character, and he's a young guy. He's kind of like young, but somewhat alienated, socially alienated kind of guy. But ultimately, I think the Wachowskis are he's our avatar into the film. Neo is our avatar into the film because he's basically every man. I think he's supposed to represent all of us, and he's the one that we should. He's taking us through this world, and we're he's our avatar as we are navigating through this world. But he starts asleep. All right. Let's talk about some of the other references really quick that come about really, really quickly in the film. This whole idea of a lot of references made to Baudrillard, other things, definitely Alice in Wonderland, too. The film makes a lot of references to this idea of going down the road. How's Alice get to Wonderland? This alternate reality once again. You know, she goes down the rabbit hole. She goes down the rabbit hole, and that whole story will be mined in symbolic ways. You know, here, you know, in the film. He's working for some consortium, some high-tech, you know, really uptight, high-tech consortium of some type or another in this big glass, you know, forbidding tower. We don't know exactly what they're doing, but we get a sense that they're up to no goddamn good, all right? And he's just like a low-level computer programmer by day, However, at night, he is this. And it plays into hacker culture. Hacker culture, like, Neo is like, and Trinity too. Trinity is the same role. They're like these kind of heroes in that culture that go under pseudonyms. And you guys know all about this, you gamer guys. You know all about, like, the guys you follow on Twitch, the guys that have become like celebrities, right? So in this underground world, Neo at night is kind of a celebrity. He's a hacker. So he runs into these other, like, Gen X. It's kind of like a drug deal. They come to his door. These hipsters come to his door, but instead of getting drugs, they get a tape, and he pulls it out of an empty, a hollowed out book. And what does the book say on it? If you look closely and you go back, it says it's Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation book, but he at first is, and remember, it's like the message that he gets before they come. Follow the white rabbit. Remember, follow the white rabbit on the screen. So they're like, hey, come out and party with us. Neo's like, nah, I'm not really into it. But then the girl turns around and she has, lo and behold, right, a tattoo of a white rabbit. And it plays into this idea of synchronicity, of things being synchronous, this idea that, well, okay, so he kind of changes his mind. He's like, all right, there's something going on here. I'm going to follow this and see where it takes me. And they take him to a club. And that's where he meets Trinity, right? That's where he meets Trinity, and we'll watch that right now. So there's that. He meets Trinity. They've never met, but, she tells him that, basically what does Trinity say to him? It's like, you've been looking for this your whole life. There's this whole interplay about, like, this kind of search for the truth, right? It's like, you think you've been looking for it, we've been looking for you. It's like, and he's like, it's like, it's not the answer, but the question that drives us mad. What is the question? The question is, what is the Matrix? And there's this quasi-romantic, it's very eroticized. It foreshadows the fact that they'll become a thing later on, and we'll talk about the role of that relationship in his redemption, the role of that romantic love in his redemption. So he goes to the club, and it leads him further into the web, the Matrix, as he becomes more and more beguiled, and wants to know more. Want to look a little bit really quick at this, at his name. Everything in the film means something, or most things mean something. The name, Anderson. Anderson or Anderson is a surname derived from a patronymic meaning. Quote, son of Anders, Andrew, itself derived from Greek. Name Andreas, meaning man or manly. Alright, so we have the son of man. Alright. It originated in parallel in British Isles and the Nordic countries. Thomas Anderson is the everyman. He is us. But he is also what? The Son of Man, right? And any of you biblical scholars out there or New Testament scholars will remember that the figure of Christ, the figure of Jesus Christ, is not only referred to as the Son of God, but also the Son of Man. Hence the term Anderson. So Wachowskis definitely knew what they were doing when they chose this name for him. He's us. He's the one, and he's us. Room 101. That's another reference to another famous dystopian book and movie by the name of 1984. For those of you who have never read 1984 or have never, at the very least, seen the movie 1984, the really good one that was done in '84 with John Hurt, that I used to show in my writing classes because we used to read 1984. He lives in room 101. This is a reference to George Orwell's 1984 because for any of you who have read that book or seen the movie, the character in that movie, the everyman who uncovers the vast conspiracy by the name of Winston Smith, is taken ultimately. That book ends on a far more pessimistic note than The Matrix. Because room 101 is like ultimately Winston Smith in 1984 is found out by the thought police, and they take him into this place and they take him to 101, which becomes the room of his worst fear, where he is brought back in. But the Wachowskis are definitely aware of that. The other thing I want to point out really quick is that the film starts in a place called the Heart. What was it called? It's got the word heart in it. The Heart of the City Hotel, which is in The Matrix, right? So there's this whole idea of the heart, of the heart, of compassion, of love being played around with as a theme, all right? And don't forget, the film ends where it begins, in the Heart of the City Hotel, all right? So there's this whole reference to the heart going on, all right? The Simulacrum and Simulation book, one of the things that Baudrillard says, one of his main contentions in that essay, in that egghead essay, which we probably won't read, because it's just too much. It's too much. One of the things he says in there, though, is that we are lost in the map. We are lost in the map as opposed to the territory, right? Think about it. We are lost in the map and we are not seeing the territory for what it is, all right? This is Neo's position in the beginning before he is given these revelations, right? The territory. Think about things like MapQuest. Think about things like Street View, Google Street View. That we can go through these things, right? It's like, I know, like, for instance, I used Street View to go to my grandparents' hometown one time in Sicily. I went through all the streets and all that. But we got to recognize the fact that, the map, doing that, or looking at something in a map and going there are two entirely different experiences, right? And yet we live in a world now where these two things become these kind of false equivalencies, where, we kind of live in the map and we think it's real, So there's that. This is just a slide I put together of numerous famous paintings of from different traditions. Nebuchadnezzar, the whole Christian symbolism here of God, of the Trinity, the redemption of Cupid and Psyche. All this kind of stuff becomes fair game for the Wachowskis, all right? Neo has certain very, very dominant traits as a character, and we find that out very early on. Even before he knows what he is a rebel. He's like the office rebel, kind of like I am in Broome. I guess. But he's got a problem with authority, and he gets called in early on in the game. He gets called in by this uptight guy in a suit. You gotta watch. It's like, if you get anything from my class this semester, all I'm going to tell you is that when some boomer white dude in a suit, you should always distrust any boomer in a suit, all right? Because they're usually up to no good, all right? Well, he comes in, he's in a suit too, but he's like, kind of like, and the guy basically kind of like calls him out. He's like, you have a problem with authority? If an employee has a problem, the company has a problem. There's this whole idea of not fitting in, of not going along, of not being a team player, of not being a company player. That is his trait. Because he's fighting, he represents to us this drive, this human drive to become an individual, to essentially individuate. And it plays on that. The theme plays on the fact that he is attempting to individuate in that way in which would seem to be our inalienable right to kind of figure out who we are and kind of do it our own way, at times. So there's that kind of driving force to this character. He's kind of a maverick. He's kind of a rebel. At first, he's kind of a geek, but later on, he very quickly he becomes like, the prototypical hero. He gets found out. They're onto him, and who's onto him? We don't know at first, because we get things on a need to know basis in this. But agents find him. Morpheus tries to get him out of it. He can't. They take him into a room, and what's the first thing that happens? The first thing that happens is that reality starts to morph for Neo. Reality starts to morph in his mouth. The very first thing that happens is that his mouth gets covered up, like with this. It just kind of vanishes, let me get to the notes here. Let me look at what I got in the notes here. And what's the message? All right. The first message is this: Why is he? And then he's bugged. He's electronically bugged. They take this thing that kind of looks like a I don't know whatever they eat at Red Lobster. The electronic version of some weird creature. He's electronically bugged, so they can hear you. Hence, there's this whole idea of surveillance society built right in 1999, of being bugged, of being surveyed, of being controlled, by being tracked, And we'll talk about that, right? Lending yourself, willingly becoming a participant in your own surveillance. We'll talk about that. But what about the mouth? What about the mouth? The mouth is this. They want us to be quiet. The powers, the ruling powers, of our society, once we start to pick apart the allegory, what are the Wachowskis trying to say? They want us to keep our mouths shut. Whether it be in academia, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be, at a party, or certain things you're not supposed to talk about. There's things that you are, and there are consequences, right, of speaking out, and this is what this scene is trying to say. They want us to be quiet, and they want us to be afraid. They want us to be afraid. They want us to be afraid of the consequences. Like, I can't post that on Facebook. It's under surveillance. I can't, we better watch, I even have friends who are like, we better watch what we talk about because, what Juliana said, what they did to the other ones, they'll come and catch you with the thought police. My response to that to you is balderdash. Speak the truth. Learn how to speak the truth. Because soon, the way things are sizing up, you're going to want to speak up for yourselves. If you speak the truth, and I honestly believe that this is a message of the film. If you stand on the side of the truth, if you stand on the side of what the truth is, the truth will ultimately aid you. Maybe there'll be consequences, but I'm not afraid of it. It's like, I'm not afraid of speaking the truth anymore. Too old for that, seen too many things to not speak the truth. There's a kind of moral obligation. As you get older and wiser, you may find that there's this kind of moral obligation to, like, call shit what it is. This is this. I always kind of joke around, like, oh, the NSA is, like, got a mole in the class and all that, but here's my gig on that. Not to be, like, all Joe Pesci about it, although I am. It's like, I want them to know what I have to say. I want the powers to be to hear me. Because maybe they'll learn something. Maybe they'll learn something. So there's that need to shed your fear. One of the overarching messages, and once he meets Morpheus, it's like, what are the routines that Morpheus goes through with him? Overcoming your fears, overcoming this limited sense of what they've told you are, and that you're much more than that, Let's look at the term Morpheus too. That's important. There's and several really, and I think they're right on. The people that have kind of picked them apart as a kind of trinity, and it even goes as far as Trinity's name being Trinity. There's this idea that the three of them kind of act as a unit. And that they're each representative, and this is not too much of a stretch, that they're each kind of representative of some aspect of our own human nature. And I think it's very cogent that Neo within this trilogy represents action, freedom. He's like that force that kind of wants to uncover that force for freedom and action. And also, I would say, he's a force of conscience. He is the conscience of the three. So there's that. Trinity, on the other hand, is like the feminine aspect of the psyche. And we'll talk more about how everybody's kind of got... She's the heart, love, compassion, And I want to talk... And I haven't brought it up, but at some point I want to talk about the idea that in all three films start with Neo being asleep, and all three films in the trilogy start with Trinity being in some kind of distress, some kind of mortal danger and distress. And what I think the Wachowskis are attempting to say with that is that the feminine part of our culture, of our psyches and our cultural heritage is under attack. Has been under attack. Hence, and we'll talk a lot more about the feminist movement and Me Too and all that stuff later on. But for now, it's like, this whole idea that feminine element is attacked by and overshadowed by this kind of militant, aggressive, masculine element. And that the feminine or the divine feminine is under siege. Morpheus is the intellect. He's also, it's like the term is taken from the Greek. He's the god of dreams, right? And he's the mind. He's the truth. He's the revealer. He's the one that he's the egghead that shows Neo what's really going on, right? Also, though, Morpheus comes from the Greek, he's the god of dreams. He is going to reveal the dream to Neo. These three characters are the different aspects of our own individual consciousness. All right? And here's where I come back to the feminist aspect of this. Arguably, the two most important characters in this film are who? Think about it. Who are the two most important characters? Who are the two... Who's the one that saves Neo and who's the one? The Oracle, right? And we'll get to the Oracle. And Trinity are both female. They are the glue. One could argue that they are the glue that keeps the whole film together, right? Or the whole mission, of overcoming, the agents of the Matrix. So there's that, all right? then we finally get to this meeting between Morpheus and Neo. And Neo comes in, and we see the scene, and it's the setup. It's more of the reveal. And here's where Morpheus basically, gives Neo this choice. He's like, there's this thing that's been bothering you throughout your life. It's been like kind of there in the background. Like you've always had this sense. His monologue first starts with this whole idea of Neo. You've always like had this sense that there was something going on in your life and around you that was just a little bit not right, just a little bit off kilter, and that it kind of was nagging you. He's like, there was this nagging feeling, and what Morpheus will say is, I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why. And I think that it speaks to society at large, that, even with the most, compliant, docile people, there's always this kind of, sometimes everything's right with the world, but other times it's just like, there's something not right here. There's something not right here. And the Matrix is about that idea of there's something not right. So I'm going to show the scene where they meet here right now. Let's watch it. So Neo opts for the red pill. That being his nature, he's not going to take the blue pill. He's the guy, right? Obviously, he's going to take the red pill. There has been some analysis of the color choices here that I have somewhere in these notes. The idea that the red as a frequency is always the frequency that kind of, in a Doppler effect, it's the one that goes forward, right? When something red shifts, it's coming towards you, it's going forward. When something blue shifts, it's going away, it's retreating. So the idea of red, of going forward into knowing the truth, Morpheus says, the feeling that most people with any kind of conscience feel at some time, something is just a little bit off, like a splinter in your mind. Okay, the pill represents the idea that finding and recognizing the truth is a choice. There's a choice involved, all right? Because you can choose, and most people do, let's be honest with it, they choose to stay asleep. They choose to stay asleep, right? Because they don't want to, they know something's not right. They know something's up. They know that there's a couple things on the horizon, my friends, especially right now in 2020, that people just don't want to look at. And they will do whatever they can, whether it's like take pictures of their cats and put them on Facebook, or go out and play in the men's pickup league, or whatever they got to do to pretend that what's happening is not happening. They'll do it. and that's an unfortunate reality, right? So Morpheus says to him, remember, he says, all I'm offering you is the truth. Alright? He's not making him any other kind of promises, just the truth. Because he knows that, Morpheus knows that the truth he's got to reveal to Neo it ain't nothing good. It's nothing good. It's this horrifying chamber where Neo wakes up in this kind of and hairless, and he's just in this goo, and we find out like what his real situation has been, including everything that has happened up to this time. That Neo, whatever other experiences that Neo was having, he was having them in this cocoon with all these kind of these hooks in them, And I think that the hooks, so he's waking up to the horror of his reality, and the hooks represent what? All the gadgets that are inside him represent what? The way the system The system of control in our own world has its hooks in us, into everything we do. And the film is this kind of this plea to we need to divest ourselves of these hooks, and these row upon rows of pods that represent people who have no inkling of reality. They still engage. It's like, and we'll get into this, the order followers, because there'll be a training program that Morpheus puts Neo in. When he first comes out, his body he's never used his body. He's a wreck. He's a wreck, and he's just seeing this horrific world, and they've got to put all these acupuncture needles into him because he doesn't know what it is to be alive. He's never used his muscles, and one of the most chilling and haunting lines in this film happens to be when Neo asks Morpheus, like, why do my eyes hurt? And Morpheus says to him, because you've never used them. Because you've never used them. And once again, I think the Wachowskis are saying, not unlike Plato in the cave, not unlike other things that we've talked about here. It's about learning how to see reality for what it is, and then act and respond accordingly. All right, I'm going to end that here. We're going to pick back up on and unpack the rest of this in the next video lecture. I hope you're well. There's no other assignment right now except to watch this and comment on it. The next one will be up very shortly. I hope you are all well. As far as going into this week, I think that we'll stay in video mode for the next lecture, and then let's see where we are by like Wednesday or Thursday. All right, it's like I want to just kind of have the option of doing what I want to do, because I want to be free. I want to be free and not be hassled by the man. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.